The New York Rangers cut Gabe Perreault and Scott Morrow. We debate if they got it right.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1395 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we got a lot to do here. We are just over 24 hours away from the start of New York Ranger hockey. The regular season kicks off against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Very much looking forward to that. Very excited for that. But what I wanted to do today is discuss the lackluster performance that the Rangers had against the Boston Bruins, losing 4-1 in Boston in the preseason finale. Not a whole lot of good in that game, but we'll try to find at least a couple of positives to take from it. But I actually wanted to start today's episode by talking a little bit about a couple of players that were recently cut by the New York Rangers, two young, promising prospects who I think a lot of us felt at least had a chance to make the opening night roster. We'll discuss that one at a time. The first is going to be Gabe Perreault. The second is going to be Scott Morrow. We got a tweet the other day that said that both of them are going to be headed to the Hartford Wolfpack, and obviously we hope that they can continue their development there, and I think there's a very good chance that we'll see probably both of them at some point this season. So we'll focus mainly on Gabe to start, and then we'll work our way to Scott Morrow as well. So my initial reaction upon finding out that the Rangers had cut both these players and that neither one was going to be making the opening night roster was kind of, I tweeted something out along the lines of, it's not the most irrational thing the Rangers could ever do. Certainly you can understand where they're coming from when they make a move like this. It's also very clearly not the most fun, not the most exciting thing that the New York Rangers have ever done either. I think certainly when you look at this roster right now and you look at some of the depth players, you look at the bottom six, you look at the bottom pairing for the New York Rangers, or not necessarily the bottom pairing, but at least the bottom two defensemen, who in my very humble opinion are going to be Susi and Vakanainen, the way that this roster is currently constructed. You look at all that, and then you look at players like Gabe Perreault, and you look at players like Scott Morrow, and it's like, man, why couldn't they have made the team? Because it does feel like the Rangers are kind of lacking depth going into this season, certainly in their bottom six, and like I said, their bottom two defensemen as well. You could probably say that about just about any team. A lot of different teams around the NHL. Everybody always wants more depth. Everybody always wants, more secondary scoring. I think every team lacks that to a degree, but I don't know, man. I mean, it looked like certainly there was some room for either or both of these players to make the team. But with that said, I've been saying all along that I do hope that Gabe Perreault starts this season in the AHL before preseason began, before training camp, before the rookie series, before rookie camp, going all the way back into the summer. That was my hope, was that Gabe Perreault, I mean, look, he's got every right to shoot his shot, right? And put his best foot forward during training camp and the preseason and try to make this team. But for me, the wisest play here for the Rangers as it pertains to Gabe Perreault was always to start him with the Hartford Wolfpack. And I'm not even saying that he has to have an extended stay. Look, I know there's people that want Gabe on the NHL roster right now. There's some Ranger fans that want to see him play an entire season with the Hartford Wolfpack and make sure he is ready to go at the start of this upcoming season. To me, the truth kind of lies between those two extremes. I think you start him with the Hartford Wolfpack. Hopefully he does a great job there. Hopefully he produces, and hopefully he gives you every sign that he's ready for NHL action. And then when the Rangers have a role for him, that's when they can call him up. That's when they can put him into the lineup. And that's where, hopefully at that point, when the Rangers do call him up, if and when that happens, that's the point where you look at as, okay, this kid has played his last AHL game. He's in the NHL to stay. We will see. Now, look, there are plenty of points you can make for Perreault as far as why he should be on the NHL roster last season. I understand that he looked pretty good in the preseason. He got 5 games under his belt with the Rangers this past season, at the very end of last season. He bulked up a little bit, which is something that I think he pretty much had to do to have, consistent success at the NHL level. You go from college to the NHL, and obviously that's quite the jump. And something else we already talked about is that the Rangers, their bottom six, they seem to lack a certain scoring punch right now. Maybe not. Maybe we'll be surprised, and maybe some of these guys in the bottom six will over-deliver, but that's not really what you expect when you look at the players that are going to be filling out the bottom six for the Rangers. But with all that said, again, with Gabe, as far as the biggest reasons why to send him to the AHL, we've seen a lot of first-rounders on this New York Ranger team who, one way or another, were essentially rushed to the NHL, or in some cases, skipped the AHL altogether. We've seen a lot of those players, whether we're talking about Lafreniere or Kakko, or guys like Kravtsov, or guys like Elias Anderson, and it hasn't always worked out. K'Andre Miller is a weird one too, because it seemed to initially work out when they did that, but then obviously he fell off the last year or two, and obviously he's no longer here. But the bottom line, the Rangers have had a lot of first-rounders debut when they're still teenagers, or they're 20, can't legally order a drink, somewhere in that ballpark. And Gabe Perreault, I believe he's 20 years old and just getting started. I feel like this probably is, the wiser decision to start him with the Hartford Wolfpack. Maybe the Rangers have heard some of the criticisms that we, the fans, have levied at them over the past handful of years. That these guys can't develop anybody, and they're always rushing, and they're always looking for a quick fix, and they're always putting people in the NHL before they're ready for the NHL. So maybe with that in mind, the Rangers decided to, okay, you know what, this offseason, we're going to exercise a little bit of caution. The Gabe Perreaults of the world, the Brant Offmans, the Scott Morrows, those guys are going to start in the AHL, and they're going to get some more seasoning, and we'll call them up when they're good and ready. And obviously, it's a little different with Offman. He's played more games than anybody else that I just mentioned in the NHL, and he was drafted before those two players as well. But still, I do think that this is probably the way to go for the most part, especially as it pertains to Gabe Perreault. And then once Perreault hopefully does kind of find his footing with the Wolfpack, once he starts putting up some big-time numbers, once he starts, in a perfect world, skating circles around some of his opponents, then the Rangers can take notice of that. And then you've gotten to a point in the season, say we're like 20 games into the season at that point, right? Give or take 20, 25 games, somewhere in that ballpark. Now the Rangers have had a good amount of time, about a quarter of the season, to analyze their veteran role players. Guys like Brodzinski, guys like Parson, guys like Radish, guys like Connor Sheary. If he ends up making the team, he's on a PTO, and I do think he's going to make the team. But the bottom line is the Rangers will have had, a pretty good look at all those players. Okay, who's over-delivering here? Who's excelling? Who's giving us more than we expected? And which guys are lagging behind? Which guys are not playing well? Which guys are maybe even a liability? And the latter group, one of those players is going to be the guy that somebody like Gabe Perreault will take his spot once he gets called up to the NHL. Like, say Johnny Brodzinski plays very well. He's on the third line and over-delivers and looks good out there and scores some goals and whatnot. And somebody like, I don't know, let's just say Radish. Radish isn't doing very well at all. Radish is going to be the guy that loses his job when Gabe Perreault gets called up. And you know what? It's fair. It's fair that way because you give all these veteran role players a chance to put their best foot forward to say, I'm part of the solution. I might not be a superstar, but I'm going to help this team this season. And those guys will kind of separate from each other, I think, if you give them about 20 games or so. And like I said, after about 20 games, hopefully Perreault is ready. And at that point, he gets called up and takes the spot of, maybe one of the veterans who's just not getting the job done, not performing up to the level that you'd like to see them perform to. So again, I'm okay with this. Is sending Gabe Perreault down to the AHL the most exciting, the most fun thing that the New York Rangers have ever done? It absolutely is not. But the Rangers might be in a situation right now where they'd rather do it like this than have to do it in the other order. And what I mean by that is start him in the AHL. And again, I know he played 5 games last year, but start him this season in the AHL and then call him up when you're ready, rather than, I'm not really sure, but I guess we'll just put him on the NHL roster to start the season, and then you end up having to send him down if, the game's moving too fast or he needs a little bit more development. And there is something to be said for that. This might be the logical way to do this and the way to, move forward with Gabe Perreault. But my big thing, whenever you do call him up, make sure you have a role for him. It's got to be at a minimum in the top 9, and you have to call him up with the idea, I mentioned this earlier, but with the idea that, okay, this might be it. He might be here to stay. Gabe Perreault might hit the ground running. We're going to give him every chance to do so. He should at least be on the third line. He should at least be on the second power play unit. Let's give this kid every possible chance to succeed, and hopefully he's here for good and he sticks in the NHL and he never has to play another AHL game. But my hope as well is that Gabe does take the right attitude to the Hartford Wolfpack. He came into camp and he said he made no bones about it. My goal this season is to make the New York Rangers. And I like that. I mean, his goal should be nothing other than that, even if the Rangers obviously decide to send him to the Hartford Wolfpack. But you just hope that he goes down there and he has that same attitude and he says, okay, you know what? I didn't make the team, but I'm here with Hartford. I'm going to do everything I can to help this team. I'm going to shine here and I'm going to force the Rangers to call me back up sooner rather than later. That's the right attitude to have. And we don't know Gabe Perreault all that well yet, but we've seen a few interviews, and obviously he played well during the preseason. I get the feeling he's that kind of kid, that he will go down there, he will take this as a challenge, and he'll be back with the Rangers sooner rather than later. But he concludes a mostly positive preseason by playing in 5 games, scoring a goal, dishing out 3 assists while averaging 14 minutes, 26 seconds of ice time. So they got a decent look at him. But again, he would have had to have absolutely, I think, set the world on fire to make the Rangers out of camp. And like I said, you call him up on an as-needed basis once you determine what his role is going to be when you call him up and whose spot he's going to take when you call him up. But in just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling here. Gabe Perreault was not the only prospect that was recently cut by the Rangers. Another one was Scott Morrow. And even though Morrow isn't as big of a prospect as Perreault, I think this might have been a little bit more surprising that he didn't make the team right at camp. I'm going to explain why and talk about what I mean by that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people cannot name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off of your first year. That's 50% off of your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the everydayers. As always, thank you guys so much for sticking with this podcast through thick and thin, all the ups and downs of New York Ranger hockey. We're going to do one more episode before the start of the NHL season. So this will be available sometime, hopefully, late morning, early afternoon on Tuesday. But we're going to have final roster decisions by the New York Rangers by that time. It also sounds like, as of this recording, that Mike Sullivan believes that both JT Miller and Artemi Panarin will be playing in the season opener against Pittsburgh. So that is obviously very, very good news. And it sounds like basically right now, as of this recording, and we might know this by the time this episode posts, but as of this recording, it sounds like basically right now there are 3 players for 2 spots with the New York Rangers. You're talking about Connor Sherry, you're talking about Noah Laba, and you're talking about Brett Berard. It looks like 2 of the 3 of them will make the roster, and they're going to have to make that decision before long, so we'll discuss that decision in the next episode. But for right now, let's talk about another recent transaction, that being the Rangers sending Scott Morrow to the Hartford Wolfpack, cutting him from training camp. And as I mentioned just a second ago, this was honestly a little bit more surprising to me than the fact that they cut Gabe Perreault. And as I mentioned a second ago, it's not because I think that Scott Morrow is a better all-around player. I mean, they play different positions. It's a little bit apples and oranges. But I don't believe that Morrow has a higher ceiling, or he's the one with all this upside, or that he's the one that is going to be a superstar right away or anything like that. It's more just because of the situation surrounding the positions that each of these players play. With Gabe Perreault, I mean, look, we've talked about this. There's quite the battle going on, even right now. I mean, we're right down to the end. I just mentioned we got 3 players for 2 spots, but there was so much competition to, fill out the Ranger roster this season, veterans and young guys like Gabe Perreault. And you can see where, as I mentioned in the last section, it would make a little bit more sense to send Gabe Perreault down, let him get some seasoning, and not have to waive a veteran player that you don't necessarily want to waive. So I can at least understand why the Rangers did that. With Scott Morrow, though, I mean, it felt like the number 6 defenseman job was his for the taking. I got to the point where I actually thought that he was probably the favorite and the front runner for that position. And the thing that really got me there and really made me think that was when the Rangers waived Casey Fitzgerald. Now, Fitzgerald has since cleared waivers, and he heads down to the Hartford Wolfpack, and he's actually the team captain. So it's nice that he made it through waivers. But at that point, the Rangers were down to only 8 defensemen. And 5 of them are obvious. They're going to be on the NHL opening night roster. And beyond that, you did have Morrow, you had Vakanainen, and you had Matthew Robertson. So looking at the lay of the land, I'm thinking okay, well, there's no way they're going to make Matthew Robertson the number 7 defenseman. That just doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, I know they would have to waive him and somebody would have a chance to claim him on waivers. But what are the odds that that would have happened? Matthew Robertson is 24 years old. He's played 2 NHL games. The Rangers drafted him 6 years ago, and they don't seem to have any real grand plans for him. So for me, it was one of those things where they'd probably just try to put him on waivers, and if somebody claims him, they claim him. And if not, he heads down to the Hartford Wolfpack. And then you would have Morrow still on the NHL roster, very likely in that number 6 defenseman spot on opening night, whereas somebody like a Rovakanainen, that makes a little more sense. You know, he's the veteran player, the guy that's been around for a while, played in some NHL games with a couple of different teams, and he'd be the guy that, you know, backs up all of your normal defensemen as the 7th defenseman. So the fact that they did basically the complete opposite of that really, really surprised me. I mean, to begin with, I thought Morrow outplayed both Vakanainen and Robertson in this preseason. You know, I mean, Morrow did have a couple of hiccups here and there, but when you look at what he brings to the table, I think there's so much more upside. He's got obviously good speed, good mobility. He's a good offensive defenseman. There are other parts of his game that are maybe still coming along a little bit, and maybe the Rangers want him to work at that. I do remember there was a game against the Devils, the second most recent preseason game, where the Rangers are shorthanded. He was out there on the penalty kill. And to be fair to Morrow, if he made the Rangers, I don't think he'd see a lot of time on the PK. But it was just kind of a strange play because, you know, the Devils are moving the puck around the perimeter. And all of a sudden, Morrow, he's in front of the net. He's got his guy covered, and he just breaks for the player that's in the corner. And I think what he was trying to do was intercept the pass, just kind of anticipate it, and then, you know, probably shoot it down the ice because the Rangers, of course, were shorthanded. But the pass never went there. It went in front to the net to the guy that was now wide open, and he was able to score. So kind of a strange play. It's possible the Rangers just want him to, you know, kind of sharpen his game a little bit, the defensive aspect of his game. And I can understand that a little bit. But just looking at the total body of work, the total package for all three of Morrow, Vakanainen, and Robertson, to me, you know, Morrow was the guy. He's just the best player. And I mean, is anybody like I've got nothing against Eero Vakanainen for a number 6, number 7 defense, and I think he's all right. But is there anybody out there in Rangerland listening to this, watching this, whatever it might be, who would have been like furious if Morrow took Vakanainen's spot in the opening night lineup? Like, is there anybody out there that's like, oh my God, Vakanainen needs to be in the opening night roster? Probably not. There might be a couple. You never know. I mean, there are a lot of Ranger fans out there, but I'm going to go with, you know, a lot of people saw what I saw, and that's that Morrow was the best option of this bunch. So do I agree with the decision to send Scott Morrow down to the Wolfpack? Not really, but like with Gabe Perreault, I can at least understand it a little bit. With Morrow, you know, there's a situation where he's only played 21 career NHL games. He's only 22 years old. The thing that I keep going back to, though, with Perreault, you know, sending him down, or rather, if you were to keep him with the Rangers, then it's a very good chance you would have to put somebody on waivers that maybe you don't want to put on waivers. Who would the Rangers have had to put on waivers if they kept Scott Morrow on the opening night roster? You would have had to put Matthew Robertson there. And again, I mean, he's still young, 24. He's a former second-round pick. I get that. But the Rangers have never seemingly had any grand plans for Matthew Robertson. And I don't think that that's about to change. So, you know, Morrow overall, I thought did well. I thought he was the best option, but I think there's a good chance that he very likely is the first prospect that gets called up to the NHL. We'll see. It depends how stubborn the Rangers want to be. It depends how much Mike Sullivan and Chris Drury want to basically defer to veterans. And I'm not necessarily even picking on the two of them because it seems like NHL executives, NHL coaches across this entire league, they always tend to do that. That's always kind of their default setting. Like if you're not sure, just throw the veteran out there. Doesn't matter how he's playing or how he's doing. Just throw the veteran out there over the young guy. But hopefully, eventually, you know, if Vakanainen struggles, maybe Matthew Robertson gets a couple of games. If the two of them aren't getting the job done, then you've got this kid that hopefully by then is ready to go. And I think you give him his chance, and, you know, we'll see what happens. But, yeah, to me, a little bit disappointed in this one. Still understand it a little bit. The one other thing I'll throw out there, too, is, you know, right now, I'm kind of assuming that it's going to be Vakanainen as a 6th defenseman, but maybe the battle between him and Robertson could be ongoing. Maybe that's like a game-by-game situation. Maybe the first, 4 games of the regular season, you see Vakanainen and Robertson kind of alternate games, and whoever plays better, okay, you're the number 6 defenseman, at least for now. I mean, anything is possible there, but I would get the feeling we're going to see Vakanainen on opening night. But I guess only the Rangers know for sure, and that's for all of us to find out tomorrow night when the puck drops against the Penguins. Looking forward to that for sure. So in just a second, we're going to shift our attention to this wonderful preseason finale, the Rangers losing 4-1 to the Bruins and just looking flat for way too much of it. We're going to discuss that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you will unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is the best because there are so many ways to play. Whether you're into player props, you really prefer some of those same-game parlays, or you're betting on your team or betting against your team, or you've just got a hunch that you have to act on, FanDuel has got something for you. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got something on the line. Whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers by discussing a little bit of this awesome preseason finale that the Rangers had against the Bruins, losing 4-1. You know, one of my biggest issues for the Rangers in this game, I think, was just not defending hard enough when it came to the goals that they surrendered, particularly the 2 goals that were scored in the first period. I mean, you look at the first goal and I don't know, like in theory, the Rangers were bodying guys, but they weren't really doing it with a whole lot of force. It felt more like the Ranger defenders were just a mild inconvenience for the Boston Bruins on this play rather than an actual deterrent. You know, you had Vakanainen, and we were just talking about him. He was on Geekie in the corner, but Geekie was having no problems, you know, kind of fending him off. And then Parson came over and he was going to help out a little bit, but he basically just kind of brushed by him. So you've got 2 Ranger defenders on 1 Bruin forward in the corner. This should not equal a perfect pass from the Bruin. You know, he's got his back turned to basically the entire rink. He's pinned against the corner there somewhat, but there's 2 Ranger defenders on him. Nevertheless, he's able to make a perfect pass to his left to Mittinen, and he makes a pass to Zadorov, and he scores. And it's just one of those plays where it feels like the Bruins never should have been able to get that puck loose from the corner. At the very least, that should have been kind of a stalemate, and you try to work it up the boards and get it out of the zone, but obviously the Rangers were not able to do that. And then the second goal, Susie with a really rough turnover behind the Ranger net, and that basically leads directly to the Bruins goal. You had Borgen going down to the ice to block the pass, I guess. The pass goes right through Mika Zibanejad. It's one of those plays where the Rangers were just kind of skating in circles and nobody really knew what to do or where they should be. But a couple of nice passes by the Bruins, and that ends up in the back of the net as well. And, you know, there's people that are going to hear this and say like, oh, well, it's just the preseason. You know, it's the preseason. I know that. I get that. But when you're coming off of as bad of a season as the Rangers had last year, I would like to see this Ranger team establish a few more better habits than what we've seen. I just don't think they were competing hard enough on these goals that they permitted. And I mentioned this in the last episode. There are 6 preseason games. Feels like maybe a little bit too many. I think next year they're going down to 4 with the regular season going to 84 games, and that's all well and good. Maybe there's some preseason fatigue there, and these guys are just bored, and they want to get to the regular season where it's more intense, and these games obviously count in the standings. But I don't know, man. I think you got to show a little bit better than this. I think it's never too early to establish some good habits for your team. And the Rangers, I don't think they've really done that this preseason. I mean, there's a couple of things to like here and there. And at the very end of the episode, we're going to go through very briefly the good and the bad of the preseason. But you watch these goals by the Bruins, and it's just a case of getting outworked. It's a case of getting outworked. There were good passes and good finishes on some of them as well. Credit where it's due to the Bruins. But again, it all was set up by the Bruins being more focused and just flat out outworking the Rangers. And those are the worst kind of goals to give up. And you just don't want that to happen. So you can say it's the preseason all you want. And I hope the Rangers come out and just destroy the Penguins tomorrow night. That would be awesome. And we'd all start feeling maybe at least a little bit better. But again, some of these habits are not things that you want to carry into the regular season. And I might be more willing to give this team the benefit of the doubt if they were coming off of a really good season, but they're not. They were coming off of legitimately one of the most disappointing teams, one of the most disappointing seasons in franchise history. So we'll see how it goes, but didn't like some of these goals. And even on the power play goal that the Bruins scored, you know, that one, obviously you're shorthanded, so you're compromised, but watch that PK and tell me it doesn't look like just complete chaos. It looked like the Rangers just nobody had any idea where they were supposed to position themselves. Guys are all over the ice. The Bruins are making some really quick, crisp passes, and it just felt like a goal was on the way. We've all watched hockey enough where we can see this. We can kind of sense it. We can kind of feel it when a goal is about to be scored. That was a perfect example of that, you know, that power play goal that the Bruins scored. Now, was there anything good that happened in this game? Well, Noah Laba scored again. and he's still in Ranger training camp, and he actually really might end up making this team out of training camp, which would obviously be, a fantastic story. There were other Ranger prospects that had more buzz, had more hype, and seemed to have more of an inside track to the opening night roster spot than Noah Laba did. But he's outplayed everybody. And there's some other Ranger rookies, some young players that played well. I think Berard and Perreault among them, even Scott Morrow maybe to a lesser degree. But the guy that's really stood out, the guy that seems like kind of a do-it-all forward, the guy that's out there busting it, scoring goals, contributing offensively. There was a play in this game where, he back-checked like his head was on fire, and then the Rangers got the puck, and he's right back in the opposite direction. This guy's all over the ice. He plays physical. He's got good size. He's not going to tower over every player in the NHL, but he's an above-average size NHL forward. And here, scoring kind of a blue-collar goal. Now, the Rangers were on the power play. It was 6-on-4, so that lends itself to being able to score because the Rangers were down 3-0, and they had pulled their goalie. But you've got a shot by Adam Fox from the blue line, and Laba's there. Laba was setting up shop in front of the Bruins net, and he's able to deflect it home and into the twine and get the Rangers on the board. Their first third period preseason goal, by the way. They finished the preseason getting outscored 11-1 in the preseason. But nevertheless, obviously a really nice redirection there by Noah Laba. And like I said just a second ago, he looks like just a very well-rounded player, a very steady, very complete type of player. Now, the big test is going to be when these games count for real and the puck drops and the regular season's underway and everybody's out there going full bore. Will he continue to shine like this? Only time is going to tell, but I do think he's earned the right to at least get that chance on opening night. And if he's going to make the team, which I hope he does, then get him out there on opening night, preferably centering the third line. Was there anything else good from this game? Matt Rempe won a fight against Mark Kastelik. That was kind of fun, right? Rempe, he's overall had a pretty good preseason. He did have a terrible turnover against the Devils that led to a goal, but other than that, I think it's mostly been positive. And the Rangers have done something that I was hoping that they would do, and I'm very curious to see if they're going to try this in the regular season. But you've seen in some of these preseason games, second power play unit, or in some cases, even the first power play unit, depending on which players are in these games for the Rangers. But they've put him in front of the net. And basically just stand there, screen the goalie, look for a redirection. The goal that Brian Offman scored on the one-timer, it was a great shot by Offman a couple preseason games ago. That goalie had no chance. The entire power play, he's just trying to see him around Matt Rempe, and he's got no chance of doing it. You're basically trying to see around a house, So put Matt Rempe there, have him screen the goalie. You get a couple of deflections off of Rempe into the net. That can work too. There's a rebound laying there. He has a chance to, bury the loose change. I think that does work. I do think that's an idea, and I do think it's something that Rangers should consider going into the regular season. Not on the top power play unit, at least not right away, but I would like to see Matt Rempe get his shot on the second power play unit. But there's something also here. Rempe, again, he won this fight. He does not get enough credit for this either. He seems to have a good sense, especially for a young player, of picking and choosing when it's time to drop the gloves. This was his first fight of the preseason, so he's not going out there and fighting every single game. But he got into a fight here with the Rangers down 2-0 with like 5 seconds left in the first period, and the Rangers having basically sleptwalk through the entire first 20 minutes. So he's trying to wake his team up. He's trying to get his team going a little bit. And hey, guys, we're 3 days away from the start of the regular season, so let's get it going here. And he's able to drop the gloves and win this fight. He won it pretty convincingly. He actually had Kastelik kind of like pinned against not the boards, it's where the bench is for the Rangers. So he almost was like having his back like bent over the boards a little bit, but they kept fighting. Rempe landed a couple of punches, and then they ended up on the ice. But yeah, Rempe picks his spots. He needed to fight here. Good example of the other side of this, I would think, would be a couple of years ago. First round against the Capitals, it was Game 3. The Rangers are far and away the better team that season. They ended up sweeping that series, but it's Game 3. I think the Rangers had the lead, and Tom Wilson is trying to get Matt Rempe to fight him, right? And Rempe's just kind of smiling at him, and he's not going to do it. And it's smart not to there because Wilson's trying to wake up himself, his team. That game was in Washington. He's trying to wake up the fans as well. Why do that? There's nothing to be gained in fighting there, because even if you win the fight, like at least it's, Wilson has accomplished his mission of trying to snap everybody into the game, get his guys going, get the fans rocking. So Rempe, I think, has done a good job of picking and choosing when he fights. When he was first called up, it got a little ridiculous. It was like every game, the start of his first shift in every game, he's dropping the gloves, he's fighting this guy, he's fighting that guy. And again, fighting has its place in hockey. I feel like it always will. But when you're just fighting for the sake of fighting and there's nothing that's even sparking it, there's no rhyme or reason to it, that's when, at least me, I do roll my eyes a little bit. But Rempe has gotten really good at picking and choosing his spots as far as when it's time to drop the gloves and when it's not. The other nice thing about this game, the other enjoyable positive thing about this preseason finale is just that. It is the end of the preseason. As I mentioned earlier, there were some good things this preseason. I don't know, though, man. You look at the entire body of work. You look at the full 6 games, and the Rangers only won 2 of them. And, again, winning and losing isn't everything in the preseason. It's more about figuring out who's going to make your team and who's going to play with who and, things like that. But I feel like the bad outweighed the good. You look at the bad. You had the injury to J.T. Miller. You had the injury to Artemi Panarin. Now, granted, it does sound like both of those guys are going to suit up, going to dress for the opener against the Penguins, but talk about giving Ranger fans a heart attack. I mean, can we just get through the preseason and the training camp healthy, please? And it sounds like they've mostly done that, but that was scary. Obviously, you had what I would say is the underperformance of Brandon Hoffman. This was not, it's not the end of the line for him. I mean, I think certainly you'll see him back on the Rangers at some point, but this is not what we were looking for Brandon Hoffman. This was supposed to be the preseason where he takes the bull by the horns and lets everybody know that he's arrived and he's going to be on this team. And it was really the opposite of that. I mean, he got cut quite a bit earlier than a lot of other prospects, some of whom are still gunning for an opening night roster spot with this team. So that was disappointing. I mentioned the third periods. And again, you can say it's the preseason all you want. Getting outscored 11-1 in the third period is not good. 2 seasons ago, when the Rangers had the best record in the NHL and they made it to the conference final and they were 2 wins away from going to the Stanley Cup final, a staple of New York Ranger hockey that season was this team is fantastic in the third period. I remember nights, certain games, once that season really got rolling and we started knowing who the Rangers were, where the Rangers would go into the third period down like 2-1, and I'd be like, yep, we got this team right where we want them. And the Rangers would come back, and often it wouldn't even be close. They would just unleash a barrage on whatever team they're playing and win the game fairly comfortably. Last season, I mean, there were too many problems to possibly count, but that was one of them. The issue that this team was never at its best when it needed to be at its best, namely the third period. So if you think getting outscored 11-1 in the third period, we can say 9-1 if you want to not count the empty netters. 9-1 in the third period is just kind of like, oh, whatever, who cares? I mean, I respectfully disagree. Again, it is the preseason, and if things go well at the start of the regular season, then we'll forget about this pretty quickly, but I just don't think that's the kind of trend you want for yourself, preseason or no preseason. There were some defensive breakdowns for the Rangers. We saw that in this game. I feel like special teams, still very much a work in progress for this Ranger team. And, not a whole lot from the established star players. Stop me if you've heard that before, but what did we really get from Mika this preseason? Or like Lafreniere? Adam Fox had his ups and downs. But then there were some good things. It was fun watching some of the young players battling for some roster spots. Noah Laba's emergence, I think that's the most fun thing of this preseason so far if you're a Ranger fan. Gabe Perreault looks good. Brett Berard looks good. Gavrikov, I feel like, has looked pretty much as advertised for this Ranger team throughout the preseason games, and they got to make it count because he was the only expensive free agent that they could afford this offseason. But he's here, and hopefully he does well. And like I said, one more episode before opening night. Looking forward to that. But we'll call it there for today. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in, and I will see you next time.